So good morning, Lex Massey. Would you like to start your presentation?
Yeah, thanks for that, Kim. And thanks for the invite to present on the Preventing Plastic Pollution project. So I'll just give you a bit of context background as to my role and then really set the scene into what the purpose of the presentation is and how it fits into, I suppose, your project and the businesses that the Environment Agency contracts with, but also touch on regulation in terms of our aim and outcomes on reducing plastic use. So we are the Environment Agency. We are the largest environmental regulator in Europe. We have a turnover around about £1.1 billion, which I imagine is about 1.3 million euros. We have a role as an operator, like any company, like Sky, BT, a construction company. And the team I manage is a sustainability team, which is very similar to, again, Sky's corporate sustainability team, BT's corporate sustainability team, or Marks and Spencer's with their Plan A. 60p of every pound we get from government, we spend through our supply chain. So we have a great opportunity to not only influence plastic reduction, and that includes single use, but also actually plastic in the things we buy, but to also drive the markets, the contractors and the suppliers that we work with to see us as best in class and really drive down single-use plastic in that 60p we get from government every year. Next slide, please, Kim. So just a quick introduction and overview in terms of, again, the Environment Agency and plastics. We'll be covering sort of why it's important. We don't just address plastics in supply chains, we also do wider sustainability. We have a very strict standard on internal actions on plastics, where we look at, we don't say we're not going to use plastic, but we take a very evidence-based approach in terms of where we need plastic, we have to justify why, as well as balancing all the other sustainable opportunities. We've recently launched the first UK construction guidance on reducing the use of plastics in construction. Half of what the Environment Agency does is actually build large flood defences, maintain rivers. It's probably around about £300 million, 350 million euros. So again, the things that we put into the water environment, onto beaches, they're all high-risk locations in terms of not just plastic release, but other materials. We've now got a set standard on how we reduce the use of plastic in what we build. I'll touch on plastics in our laboratories. As an agency, we do a lot of testing, both from a water quality perspective, even through to doing some for UK government in terms of COVID, in terms of some of our labs. So we have a couple of very large laboratories, as well as a big science estate, where we've had lots of success on plastic reduction. I'll touch on really sort of the challenges around plastic reduction. It's never an easy sort of task to work with contractors and to get them to understand about plastic, because it's cheap, it's ready available. Contractors like it because it's light, they can move things, they can protect things. So just around how we balance that off. Some top tips around what we've learned. There isn't a Bible that you can pull off to understand how to reduce plastics. There's a few sort of steps in terms of hierarchy, in terms of what we take. And then just a summary and further information in terms of where you can go across the agency and other bodies. Just to be clear on this presentation, my team, we undertake the role as the operator at the Environment Agency. We are a regulator and advisor. But my role is as an operator in terms of making the Environment Agency function to deliver on our outcomes from government. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, plastics, where do we start? So we all know 3-4 years ago, blue ocean, society, rather like net zero, was sort of trumps this in terms of sort of similar glide path in terms of where we are on carbon net zero. Plastic started this, 3-4, probably even more years ago. And the agency needed to, formulate a really sound evidence-based ways of working, but also reach out about just being really clear in our role. We are arm's length from government, so there is sensitivities with our sponsors, DEFRA, but we do have a key role in driving single-use plastic and plastic reliance, both in terms of what we buy, but also who we regulate. So you see our approach to plastics. We have a formulated plastics delivery group as an organisation, which is headed by Judy Proctor, who has oversight of our 7 strands, really, in terms of what we do around plastic reduction. This includes getting the basics right. Everything we do has to be underpinned by research and evidence. So we do a lot of that internally. And then that informs working areas around how we regulate the waste sector, but then further upstream, how we actually look at the packaging regime and influencing plastic reduction on that. So we do both resources, but consumption and the waste. Water quality planning, working with the water sector, again, reducing microbead loss, plastic in the aquatic environment. Our role, sustainable business, again, we're mandated to reduce plastic within our supply chain and really share that across government and our suppliers. And again, the plastics and sustainability team, hence why we're here today, that really sort of out-facing, working with communities, embracing people to get them to the call to action to reduce plastic within the wider society. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, we like priorities at the High Environment Agency. And this is our structure in terms of how we approach our 7-point plan, which we can share with you. Again, it's constantly expanding our evidence base on plastic, looking at how plastic breaks down in the environment. Certainly for construction, it was looking at UV, abrasion, thermal loss, frost. We're constantly undertaking R&D in terms of any plastic that we do use and how it does break down and the pathways in terms of how it enters the watercourses. So there's a team actually working on that. There's a circular economy piece. So again, just looking at the entire life cycle of, plastic, but also other materials. Looking at, how you reduce in the first instance, then reuse and drive, recyclability, dispose if need of. Looking at waste powers, new legislation on plastics. Again, very outward facing, but pushing the waste sector and the producer sector to reduce reliance and use of plastic. Microplastics in the water environment, how we really sort of regulate the water sector amongst other sectors to reduce the instance in, the first instance to eliminate more plastic getting into the water environment. And again, where our team comes in, sustainable business, plastics in both for our estate, which is, Kim's in an office this morning, that's our estate. We have a lot of depots. We do a lot of co-working with other public bodies. So pleased to say we have eliminated single-use plastic from that, but also the wider supply chain, which is, really driving down the reliance on plastic from that 60p in every pound we get from government. And then again, critical to underpinning this, public awareness and key partnerships in driving those messages across the wider country. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, I always start with, why address sustainability in supply chains? Our emission strategy, which is our, how we manage sustainability at the Environment Agency, is based on the 17 goals. I think you could say plastic probably cuts across the majority, as does the work of the Environment Agency. We prioritise around about 4 to 5 in terms of why we're here, in terms of government, but also where our widest sort of collaborative effort is in terms of delivering sustainable outcomes. Again, everything we do in terms of carbon, plastic waste, we always come back to these 17 SDGs. Not every one, but prioritising which ones we need to address on, as well as the wider targets that underpin. It's about 160 targets that underpin the 17 goals. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, coming to, the 40p we get from government is for the buildings, paying for staff, looking at how we operate, single-use plastic free on that side of things. The other bit is really driving the supply chain to eliminate plastic use, certainly single use, and then reducing the reliance on any plastic that we do need to use, mainly around construction and IT. So again, why would we address sustainability in contracts? The agency, its reputation, we want to be leading this. We're very transparent in our approach. We do a lot of reporting, certainly on carbon emissions and wider resource use. And again, the people who we serve, the customers, expect this as well as the people who work for us. But there's key things around, there's a changing world. Climate change impacts all of those 17 SDGs. I always address climate change as time, because that's what climate change is. It's 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 years, but it's understanding the impact on plastics and also the things we put into the environment and looking at how they may change to make sure we put in the right materials. Legislation. So again, it's driving the right outcomes through legislation, enforcing that through sort of the outward facing part of what we do. Government commitments. The UK government did have a pledge 2 years ago for all government departments to be single-use plastic free by last year, which the majority of, certainly DEFRA and ourselves, achieved. There's been a lot of learning out of COVID, because of rapid testing and the response to PPE, and there's a lot of learning we now need to take in terms of, when we get back to the new norm, how do we address, that single use in terms of COVID safety. Again, coming back to responsible business, we act and lead on this. We want to be seen to be the leader in terms of how we contract with suppliers. And again, I'll touch on the business model, how we do this, working with, procurement, contract managers, the client, and fundamentally the supplier. Looking at cost always comes into this. Cost is going to drive things up, certainly around if we're not going to use plastic, how we overcome that, and looking at, sort of life cycle scenarios. And then again, the real personal connection. A lot of people now buy into ethical brands. I think for the last 6 months, every advert ever makes, reference to net zero, carbon. There's a lot of marketing companies that have come online. But again, having that personal connection and doing the right thing when we know what the issues are. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, these are, when we come to it, why do we do sustainability contracts? We always come back to the SDGs because that's the international framework for how to manage sustainability well. We have a lot of other drivers, the 25-year environment plan from government, which has key targets on resource use, including plastic. We have a set of targets called greening government. So government actually mandates targets for government departments, as well as ourselves at the Environment Agency. And again, just other drivers, internal drivers, it's a core duty of what we do, as well as embedded into our management system in terms of where we want to improve the environment. Next slide, please, Kim. So why do we address sustainability in supply chains? So our supply chain, like I said, it's very similar to, I suppose, what a water company is probably the nearest business that is a very similar operator to us. We buy and use things like any other sort of organisation. We manage probably 22,000 kilometres of waterways. We have a lot of assets that take a lot of waste out of them. We have 10, 11,000 people. So we need to move them around, move waste around, move materials around. But then again, the other part of what we do, we always try to innovate. So if we are doing that, it's, reducing plastic where we can. It's delivering it in a low carbon way, making sure our staff are all, suitably trained and they deliver on these outcomes and they really understand why. Then again, just a couple of other pictures. It's quite timely. Clothing is one of the current contracts we're being consulted on at the moment. Previously, we've always looked at recycled content in terms of driving the market, PET bottles, doing the right thing. When you look at the evidence now, we'll probably be moving away from that because of microfiber release. We've got a piece of work on looking at what is the most sustainable material for our, next clothing needs, not only across the Environment Agency, but DEFRA. Not to say we won't be using plastic, we will. We have to meet certainly British standards, and also longevity in terms of waterproof. But in terms of things where it's washed, where there is potential for release, it's really looking at, the whole life cycle of what we're doing on clothing and coming up with the best outcome for the products that we're going to be buying. Other ones around that, again, IT, IT, you look at casings of keyboards, monitors, also laptops, it's all plastic. So, driving, again, we need to use plastic, looking at recycled content, looking at the recyclability of it at end of life, making sure if we have to use it, it's as more in terms of recycled content, but also ensuring at the end of it, we can recycle it 100% and then put it back into the market for other products. And then just two others on there, again, looking at the labs in terms of, plastic consumption within the labs is significant for us. I'll touch on the successes we've had on that. And timber, including other materials. We use a lot of timber, concrete, as well as earth moving for the things that we build. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, this just puts real context as well as sort of the scale of what we're up against. So if you think about the turnover and the size of the Environment Agency, looking at carbon, I always start with carbon. Everything that underpins carbon is resource and consumption, and plastic is a key one in terms of both reducing emissions, but also reducing reliance on single-use plastic and plastic use. But in terms of where we focus our efforts, you can see on the first sort of orange pie chart, it's construction. 50% of what we do on resource use and consumption and carbon emissions is construction in terms of building flood assets and maintaining waterways. And then it's the usual suspects. It's around fleet. We have a number of vehicles, a number of sort of complex lorries, things that float on water. We do have a very wide breadth of fleet to carry out our duties. We also have emissions around water treatment because we do use water as an organisation, and then things around sort of buildings, pumping water. The agency moves a lot of water around because of our duties for flood defence. And then IT in terms of the kit that we use. So you can see plastic sort of, it cuts across every carbon emission in terms of a resource use, but we do reduce it to a practical minimum required. Next slide, please, Kim. This just really gives, again, when you look at plastic use across an organisation, it's like anything, you go for seeing what money you're spending, seeing what units you're spending against that. So if it's single-use items, if it's a contract, and then prioritising them, to reduce the reliance and move to a sustainable alternative. This just gives you an idea of the complexities of this sometimes, of where impacts lie. So if we buy plastic or if we reduce the reliance on plastic, sometimes actually only 50% of the impact is from that first supplier. You've then got to consider, well, actually, where these materials coming from? How's it getting there? Is it the UK? Is it further? How can we actually reduce, that materiality or impact down to a minimum? So it's really pushing the boundaries, but looking at where those emissions lie. So 50% of our carbon emissions actually happen beyond, our first supplier, and it's really them we need to be driving to, move away from plastic, as well as to not just single-use plastic, but just single-use application for the majority of things that we use. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, how do we set about this? The internal actions, we've got a 7-point plan. We have a collaborative working group. This was all evidence-led. I didn't know how much plastic I was using 2 years ago. I checked the contracts. I looked at what we were spending. I had a bit of a list, but actually staff are key to this. Staff reporting that via a network, which we can then track and actually hold the contractors to account. So this is both at home, staying in the hotels. We've made certain hotel chains plastic free, but it's not just sat in the office or sat at home. It's people being out and about as well, getting the intelligence from staff. And again, utilising the network of plastic champions we have at the Environment Agency, really corralling people to say, if we don't know about issues, I can't action it, and I can't take contracts and suppliers to task We've been really successful in driving that change and challenging the supply chain, but having the evidence, from staff to really sort of drive them to move away from plastic use. Next slide, please. So again, you saw the priorities before. We've got the SDGs. We spend £600 million a year across a wide range of categories. We've probably got 5,000 suppliers. Where do you start with that, with plastic? Well, again, coming back from staff reporting things, but also looking at, the money we spend and the things we order in, basically. Working with our procurement colleagues, we actually prioritise the areas into 10, and these probably account for over 90% of where, plastic is within our supply chain. It's common things around, if we do produce plastic, well, actually, we're making sure it's to a certain standard, it's recyclable, it's clean, it goes back into the system. We collect a lot of waste that we aren't responsible for because we manage waterways. We have a lot of assets that remove waste. So again, if we have to do that, we're managing it in an appropriate way, again, and we're looking to recover that. Also work with landowners to reduce it in the first instance. Again, colleagues and suppliers, it comes back to, we're writing a contract, we'll just have a clause in saying, we expect you not to use single-use plastic, or if you do, you have to evidence why or provide sustainable alternatives. So if anyone wants to work with us or contract with us on a new contract, it's just there. And it allows the suppliers to look at different items and innovate, really, to come back to us with ideas. So first and foremost, it's just getting it plain and simple in front of the supplier in terms of whatever you're buying, and just getting those expectations and being fair to them, but also enabling them to come up with other ideas, because myself and the team can't come up with everything on plastic reduction. Big area for us, consumables, cleaning. We've had a lot of success around reducing and eliminating single-use plastic on cleaning. We have 220 offices, depots. We have a lot of co-sites. So again, a big impact, certainly during COVID, looking at, reducing and even just doing bulk deliveries, refilling things, reducing sort of single use in its entirety. Stationery, again, looking at, we use a lot of stationery, so moving away from, again, just single use in its entirety, but also plastic in the use of the things that we use. Again, labs, I'll touch on in terms of, single-use plastic in labs, what we do across the country. Clothing, so this is both about what's within the clothing, what we package the clothing in, and then how it's returned end of life. So we're doing a lot of work on that at the moment in terms of, there's a lot of issues. The main issue around clothing, around recyclability or plastic, is branding, believe it or not. And that's the main discussion we've got at the moment. The agency wants to be seen. It wants branding. Actually, it reduces end of life and recyclability. So currently we're looking at options about how we can come up with a solution. Patagonia have just removed their branding from all clothing to make it easy to recycle. So we're really pushing the market on that to come up with ideas. And Gore-Tex, we're going to be using a recyclable Gore-Tex application for certain outdoor clothing. It's plastic-based again, but at least we can demonstrate we're using recycled content for items that can be washed up to sort of 30 times whilst being protected. So there's loads of innovation within clothing at the moment that the team's looking at. We use a lot of external venues. So coming back to staff, staff who work for us, they work for us for a reason. We are an environment agency, and if we're spending public money with hotels or venues or food, well, actually, we want food. We want single-use plastic free. We'll make that clear. If we're using a venue, we want single-use plastic free, as well as a vegan vegetarian meat option for staff. We've had real good success on that. Again, computers and IT, the stuff that makes us move, stuff that is critical to delivering outcomes, looking at different forms of packaging, moving away from plastic, making sure it's recyclable, and also reducing any virgin plastic that we use in kit. And the last one I'll touch on this, construction, which is a real big issue for us, because plastic's seen as a lower carbon alternative, or it has been in the past on construction. So again, it's coming up with, if we do need to use it and it's carbon versus plastic, we have a clear set of principles in terms of addressing that and where it can and can't be used. Next slide, please, Kim. Just coming back for this, so our top 10 approach. Again, these categories are probably very similar for other organisations or even local authorities potentially, although I'd probably take the construction out. We were recognised 2 years ago for IEMA, who are the sort of leading corporate membership body in the UK for environmental management. We were recognised for our successes and outcomes, and shortlisted across the country against some real big corporate companies for our approach to plastic reduction within the supply chain. Next slide, please, Kim. So just coming on again from some successes. So again, from the staff, from looking at the spend and the units, we really started to understand actually where our plastic impact was, especially around single use, because that was our sort of focus at the first. You can't do everything; you've just got to prioritise and look at the 2080 principle. So we went for single use, the stuff that staff told us, the stuff as well we thought we could get a cost saving. So again, it's really simple things, but actually when we presented the business case back, things around, we do have tea and coffee provision. So actually, if we're doing that, providing it to staff, why would we use plastic bottles when, that's in our gift just for a simple change to have a bulk up or offer it more locally in glass bottles, thereby having multiple benefits. So we had a real sort of benefit. We consume a lot of tea and coffee. But now moving to obviously 34,000 fewer bottles a year around plastic, there's still an impact from the glass. As part of that, we did work up a bit of carbon mapping in terms of the cost benefit, but also the carbon benefit of moving to glass and more locally sort of sourced areas. Another simple one, we have a lot of what we call operations teams. So these are teams who go into the rivers to meet members of the public. They protect property, they maintain rivers, just giving them an actual branded EA aluminium bottle rather than allowing them to go out and purchase sort of single-use items. Again, for things that we were providing and paying for, had a significant achievement in, staff embraced it. They got the bottle, they could fill it up, it keeps it cold, it also keeps it warm in winter, you can take it with them, you can take it home. It's a massive success on single-use plastic reduction, as well as a cost saving. And this is where it comes back. The initial cost up front was significant for the aluminium bottles, but the saving when looking at what we were spending on bottles, I think the payback was less than 12 months. So again, it's just presenting that credible business case and looking at not just up front, but over sort of 1, 2, 3 years. And again, we have, I think Rich Lappin might have spoke to some of you around the work on labs. He leads our sort of plastic reduction within our laboratories, looking at sort of recyclable ones which we can reuse for testing. Again, we do need to use plastic in some circumstances, but looking at the recyclability of it, but also what it's been made out of, pushing recycled content at the same time. We had real success as well in terms of reducing sort of any sampling syringes, but again, adopting that hierarchy and reusing them in the first instance. Next slide, please, Kim. Again, there's a picture there of the labs. I think Rich might be in there, actually. Looking at sustainable swabs. Again, prioritising, looking at where the single-use items were. This isn't just the application, but it's the bottles that people go out, to the beaches to collect things in. It's things coming back. It's the gloves they use. We need to use gloves to protect because health and safety is paramount. But actually looking at, if we do need to use it and it is plastic, let's ensure it's closed loop and at least the plastic's captured within the system. So Rich Lappin and the labs have had real good success on, again, reducing single use in its entirety and then really pushing where we do need to use it. It is recycled and put back into the market. Come back to the top 10 hotels. We use public money. We did some what we call disclosure work. So we spend a lot of money. We spend, staff stay in London, Bristol, Birmingham, and these stay in certain hotel chains. And we've really pushed a lot of them, including, I probably can't say actually, but I had a session with a big chain 2 weeks ago who are now undertaking a sustainability strategy because they've seen their transparency was nil. And it was not that we weren't going to use them, but we want to take you on a journey we spend a lot of money with you. You're creating an impact. This is where the impact is. There's nothing on the internet, even if you Google about plastic or carbon. We're really bringing them on now to sort of shape, their sustainability vision for the next 5 years. But again, it's just using where staff want to stay, because they want to stay in, chains that are ethical, that's sustainable, but also having that open dialogue with the hotels and venues. Other things, everyone's probably sat on a piece of furniture. You've probably got a desk. We do a lot of work on plastic reduction across furniture. All of our products have product labels to show you what they're made out of. If there is any plastic, what it is, what you can do with it at the end. And our furniture supplier can take all the furniture we use at the end of the life and actually break it down modular. So again, it's looking at it a bit differently. So rather than just a chair, actually you can take the arm off, or you could take a leg off, or you could take, so it's not just a molded unit, it's actually modular, and those bits can then be extruded and reused. So we're really pushing that. Again, we're not just buying a chair, we're looking at, well, actually, what's it made out of? Do you need it? And what's the end of life? What can we do with it? The EA pension fund, this is one that I think doesn't get the credit it deserves. Our pension fund is probably worth about £4.5 billion. And again, our hedge fund managers invest in a lot of companies in terms of getting a return for our members after they leave us. So again, we see that, it's money similar to what we do, but on a very larger scale. So they've just come out and said, well, up to 2045, we're now going to be investing in nature-based companies, really pushing green technology. And again, they look at plastic in terms of working with BSI, pushing this plastic standard. And if we are going to be investing in companies through the pension fund, we'll adopt that. And actually, you need to demonstrate that you're working to that standard, as well as being low carbon. And that's been a real big success in terms of, you think of the pot of that money. And the last one, managing plastics in construction, the first UK guidance document within the construction sector on reducing plastics in the wider construction sector. Next slide, please, Kim. So current and future opportunities. Again, you can look at this sort of high level. We still use plastic. We've eliminated single use as far as we can. We're now into the actual, reducing plastic reliance. And the issues for us this year are going to be clothing and PPE. Even hard hats, in terms of they have to be made out of plastic because of the British standard. But let's take a step back. How can we do it differently? How can we ensure that they're all recycled? How can we ensure that people don't leave them in the cars? And how can we ensure they may have a longer life? IT is always a big one. We're going through a big rollout of new IT equipment at the moment. Construction, we still use plastic, although a lot less than what we did. And again, flooring. So coming back to that furniture, flooring, we've always sort of pushed recycled content within flooring that we use rather than natural fibres. Actually, the evidence on that, the air release, not just aquatic release, but air release, we've said, well, actually, we need more evidence on that, and is it the right thing to do? So again, you can see some of the issues we're up against in terms of making the right sustainable decision in future contracts. Other ones, we have a lot of temporary flood barriers, which are made out of plastic. For instance, I've had a call this week about what do we do? What can they do differently? And it's either we move away from the material altogether, look at biodegradable, but then again, looking at, well, can it be recycled? Will it actually stand up to a flood event? Because we've got to protect property. So again, we're continually pushing sort of discussions, and fundamentally, it's the project manager who's coming to us saying, help, I've got to buy 60 kilometres of flood barriers and plastic. What can I do differently? And it's us then coming up with that sustainable solution. And again, just one around the labs, which Rich probably has a lot more detail on, is around dissolved metal sampling. Next slide, please, Kim. There's quite a lot in this slide. But again, it's just really looking at managing plastics in construction. There's a lot of a lot of potential releases, because you come back to the site itself. So you use a lot of plastic, packaging, things being delivered. the on-site stuff, the people who are there working, the PPE that they use. So we had a lot of success in reducing single-use plastic down on that, as well as using alternatives. The real next bit is actually looking at plastic swarf, which was a real issue for us, where we've used plastic in certain environments, because again, if it's not bespoke and we need to cut it, how do we reduce that down if we have to use plastic in an aquatic or abrasive environment? And the third one, again, which we've just started work on, is sandbags. Historically, people like sandbags because they protect, they do a good job against flood defense. Actually, they're made out of polypropylene and they do degrade very quickly. And often it's a householder's responsibility to get these, as well as our responsibility to protect our assets. So we're really looking at, alternatives to plastic-based sandbags. But again, we could use cotton, but is that the right thing to do? Cotton is, the second most polluting industry in terms of water quality in the world. And in terms of where we get it from, you're probably looking at areas that are subject to modern slavery, possibly. So again, it's really working with the suppliers, looking at the need, looking at the best solution in terms of, the next sort of set of sandbags that we buy. So plastic really cuts across, the whole raft of construction. The principles there are, set clear from anyone who works for us, Environment Agency, but also our suppliers. So, it's that sort of reducing the need. It's using less plastic products. It's reducing the risk of microparticle release to the environment. So keeping it away from abrasive environments, away from UV, away from, thermal or heat exposure. And then again, just monitoring things as well. If we do have to use plastic, making sure it's being monitored. We have a lot of assets out in remote locations, can be sort of susceptible to sort of damage or vandalism. So again, it's constantly monitoring, where we do need to use it and coming up with sustainable alternatives. And under that guidance, we do have a list where traditional things like, plastic piling, we'd have a list of other materials or suggestions that staff can use. And that's really because staff are saying, I have no idea. I'm an engineer, but I don't know a lot about plastic or carbon. So what the guidance does is, well, if you're using steel piles or plastic piles, here's a decision you need to go through, as well as other natural materials you should be using to reduce plastic reliance. Next slide, please, Kim. Again, managing plastics in laboratories. So again, these are just our sort of the outcomes we've achieved, not just on plastic, but just on water use, reduction, carbon emissions from not only reducing carbon, but looking at how we power the labs. And then again, just having a zero waste is okay, but it doesn't really drive the right behaviours. It's zero waste to landfill, but actually you need to reduce waste as well. So if you reduce your reliance on plastic and single use, reducing your total waste, and obviously anything to landfill, because we haven't got long left before the landfill sort of capacity ends. And again, under that, we use a lot of energy at the Environment Agency, but we generate a lot as well from renewable sources around sort of PV, photovoltaics, and also wind turbines. Next slide, please, Kim. So again, the wider challenges, this hasn't been easy. We've had to influence suppliers, the contract managers, the people who buy things, because they just want to do it. They want to do it right. And they've got to convince the public, if they're not using plastic or if it's to protect property, why we're doing it. So it's been a real challenge in terms of influencing that, as well as the contractors. But the main things we came up against is it is widely used. And it does have many benefits, and you've got to balance them off against other materials. Really complex industry. There's many different forms of plastic, as well as labelling requirements, and the waste sector isn't currently set up to recycle this efficiently, because the way the agency is set up, we have to do that locally in terms of plastic recycling and recovery. Again, coming back to companies, this is just unique to us in terms of the remaining plastic we need to buy in. But every company or organisation is different, and you've got to reflect that. It might not be as much of an issue for us as someone else. Our influence over certain products, we don't have a massive influence. You know, we spend quite a bit of money, but actually against a big company like, I don't know, Kellogg's, if we bought something off Kellogg's, we'd be 0.1% of spend. So really, how do we drive, you know, these companies to really take ownership and drive plastic reduction? So we've taken some innovative sort of different ways to that. And again, you know, plastic it's influenced by demand, and this becomes an opportunity in terms of both reducing it, but balancing off natural alternatives that we're looking into. Next slide, please, Kim. Again, market activity. This might be a little out of date, but these are the sort of things I mentioned. We work very closely with procurement, and their role to me is, I'll say to them, I don't want plastic. This is the evidence. This is what we're buying, and these are the sort of things we're considering. They'll then look at, you know, the market in terms of how we're being fair to contractors, what the risk might be, both in terms of buying anything, but also the end impact on this. And they really provide that sort of market analysis across that, as well as risks and opportunities. But again, you know, plastic price drop, it is volatile in terms of both the packaging market and the waste market. Industry only likes clean, recycled materials. So if you do have any waste, it has to be that. Otherwise, they won't look at it. We are quite disparate in recycling. You know, there's 150, 200 local authorities. Each has a slightly different approach to plastic recycling. So again, we're a national organisation. It does make it harder to successfully recycle plastic in certain places. And again, the big issue around if there is any exported plastic waste, you know, where's it going? And, you know, what are the checks that people are doing to ensure that it's going to an ethical or sort of local based place, because you've probably seen in the past 6 to 12 months evidences of that, where it's happened in certainly the Asia market in terms of waste being dumped there. Next slide, please, Kim. Again, this is just a hierarchy. If you ever come back to it, if ever you come to a contract, just put this in. It's the same for carbon. It's the same for waste. You know, you can adopt this across plastic. So you avoid it in the first instance. You know, rethink it. If you do need it, well, let's think a bit differently. And then just, if you do need it, you reduce, obviously, the plastic content. Where you're sourcing it from, is it local? Can we have a low carbon impact sort of plastic, or a biodegradable one possibly? And again, looking at actually the reuse at end of life, and how can that be recycled or even returned? So then you constantly keep it in the loop. That's the hierarchy I'd always come back to in terms of, you know, contracting or how the Environment Agency approaches plastic reduction. Next slide, please, Kim. Again, this is similar to any procurement cycle, you know, whether it's a local authority or a company or, you know, someone who you represent. It's getting in early, looking at the business need. What is it we actually need? And then just coming up with the requirements, and just being open with the suppliers saying, you know, we don't want plastic, or we recognise you might need to use plastic, come up with ideas, and then we'll take that. We'll invite you, we'll make it competitive and really drive you to think differently, really, on plastic reduction. And then those who come back with the ideas in the supply chain, you know, we'll work with you and spend money with you. So again, it's using public money efficiently, but driving environmental outcomes through carbon, plastic, or whatever, you know, the product or service we're buying in. Next slide, please, Kim. You can probably skip through these. There's quite a lot of detail, but these are just the steps. So you can see what you've got to go through just for one contract. That's why it's so important to prioritise. So top tips, you know, it's understanding your impact. Coming back to that, obviously the things you buy, you look at your spend ledger, look at the things that staff are telling you, but really understanding that and where your impacts are. Prioritise it. You can't do everything. You've got to be proportionate. I always use the example of a pen. You know, the impact of a pen it's not really significant. It's a bit like clothing. The lower value for us, but again, it's the stuff people use and they see out in the field, and it's the stuff that customers see. So it's just getting a balance between reputation and impact. Always apply a hierarchy, which I just touched on above. And then again, just look at the life cycle of anything that we're buying or using in terms of to make us operate. Make sure it's evidence, lead by example, it's constant engagement, you know, just be two-way and open with either suppliers and staff. And the most thing is, communicate in terms of the success you've had on plastic reduction. Next slide, please, Kim. These are the supplier benefits. Again, when we started this, suppliers would be quite, oh, well, we're just going to put in a tender and, that's it. Well, actually, no. It's like the hotel example. If we're using hotels spending public money, we spend a lot of public money and drive change across government. This is what we want. So it's about being a bit bolder, clearer with an upfront. And, a lot of these companies now, you'll see there's certainly the net zero ones or the plastic reduction ones. They have a USP. They're actually driving this. And if they work for the Environment Agency, it's one of those ticks in the, if they can contract with us, it's one of those non-tangible things that they can, advertise as well as demonstrating if they are reducing resource, saving money as well as being sustainable. Next slide, please, Kim. And again, it's not just looking at money you've spent, it is the culture bit. We've gone through a big culture change at the agency. It's partnership working, external influence from government, from us, from suppliers. 20% of all the internal things we receive from staff are plastics related. So again, it's making sure we action them, but also feed back to them. And, again, we've reduced our plastic waste, our 31% sort of in the last 2 years just from our own estate. So we're continually driving this. It's not a massive impact. It's probably only about 5 to 10 tons, but still, my aim is, well, that should be zero. Certainly in our offices, if there's any sort of, or at home, if people are using plastic. Next slide, please, Kim. So summary, it's commercially key in this. If you don't get commercial procurement, you have to get them bought on. And it's just playing in that full package, evidence, cost, looking at risk, but provide an alternative. Just do the big things you can. Can't do everything. Just have a plan for how you're going to approach this. Develop that, communicate it out. Record this as well. Play that back to the organisation, the supply chain, about what your successes is. And again, it's just about working together through that cycle. So it's the purchaser, contract manager, or whoever it is, your supplier, being fair with them, and colleagues. The people who use these things, people tend to forget. We just go to the contract manager. Well, actually, no, because staff use these. So get feedback off your staff about what they're using and where the benefits can be. And final slide, please, Kim. So further information, again, Environment Agency Plastics and Sustainability Team. There's a generic email there for sort of further add-on things. And again, there's the Preventing Plastic Pollution website and all over social media, Instagram and Twitter, and also LinkedIn. And if there's anything direct, by all means, come through sort of Kim and myself in terms of supply chain benefits. Next slide, please, Kim. I think that's it. So quite a lot to take in, but happy to share our approach. And I'll pass you over to Kim, please.